Well, when you looked at the film, I guess, what was the most significant issues you saw in the second half on Sunday?
In the second half, just being able to execute it at a high level through 4 quarters. And we talked about that. We know we want to be a consistent offense. And, that wasn't our best showing, obviously, in the second half. And having those 3 and outs happen the way they did, the effectiveness of us as an offense on third down, we know is imperative to playing good complementary football. And, we've moved forward, looked at those corrections. It's always all 11, starting with the coaches and then moving on to the players of how we execute, how we handle some of that adversity that we did face in the second half. So feeling confident we were able to get those corrections done, move forward, get into a Wednesday practice, now on to Thursday, and ready to move forward and go against a really good Detroit Lions team.
Okay, you've heard execute all week. What exactly was the plan?
I think when you get into the situations that we did in the second half, go through a first half where we don't punt the football. We have a couple chances there maybe to finish with touchdowns instead of field goals. I know that, but first game. And then I think in the second half, starting with me, when things aren't perfect in the first part of that first series where we go out there with the 3 and out, coming back with that mindset of we don't need to press, we don't need to try harder or do anything different. We need to really go back to our fundamentals and really execute at a high level. And not without getting into specifics of all 11 and play calls and all that stuff. It's just going back to fundamentals and really trusting training, trusting all this practice work, and executing at the highest level like we do out here every single day, like we did throughout training camp, and feeling confident about doing it that way moving forward.
If Stone and Jake end up playing tackle this week, how much easier is it for them to have this week versus the situation where they're thrown in third quarter?
Yeah, I think both of those guys, for us, we have all the confidence in the world in both Stone and Jake. Jake did a great job in 2021 against the Lions, starting against those guys. Stone's had his chance to be in there. It's not always the easiest thing in the world to get thrown in the mix in the middle of a game like that, or especially towards the latter half where we really need to get things done there. But we know execution, the things that they can do, the offense, that they've been a part of now for the last several years, makes us feel comfortable with them going in there and executing. And like everything else in football, it's not always going to be about one guy or 2 guys. It's about all 11 of us coming together on the field and executing at a high level, so we can play that good complementary football. We can have a good balanced attack on offense and play consistently through 4 quarters.
What's the biggest challenge of the blitz packages that the Lions will show?
I think starting up front with the great rusher and Hutchinson there, and then just like last week when we faced Aaron Donald, you face an elite pass rusher like he is transitioned to in this league. He's going to garner a lot of attention right there, but making sure that doesn't take away from the other guys. And we know that the Lions historically, they've brought, Coach Glenn does a great job with a multitude of blitz packages. They've varied every single season, every single week. So being ready to be prepared to adjust and adapt on the fly in the course of the game to anything that we see newness, but also just, again, going back to fundamentals, going back to our rules, and really trusting, for the guys to trust themselves and everyone around them to do the right thing.
What's Hutchinson's style as a pass rusher?
I think it starts with like any great defensive lineman with high effort. He's nonstop. His motor is excellent, and then he has a good mix of complementary moves, whether it's speed to power, whether it's using some of the pick stunts, or whether it's just going straight with speed around the edge right there. So he's got a good mix, he's got a good repertoire. They move him around. He played over the guard some, in that first game there, and he was able to generate pressures in a multitude of ways.
When you're pressing, is it due to something that you see that's just not executing? Is that why there's a tendency to kind of gather plays there?
And I think, anytime that we're out here as a coaching staff and the players and we're talking about it, we're always really battling that mindset of having to go outside of the framework or to do too much in a certain scenario. And I think when you get into a spot on offense where, hey, the goal or the expectation is to score every time you touch the ball, right? That should never waver, no matter where you're at in a football team. And then when some of the things don't go perfectly, okay, how do you go ahead and play the next play the next game? And like for us, the mindset right now on offense is not letting one bad half of football really trickle into the season or trickle past just what it was, which was one half where we know we can do a better job. And I think that's where it comes back to, we don't need to go outside the framework of what we've been practicing, what we've been putting on tape as far as training camp, OTAs, all the off-season work that the guys have done. Just staying within ourselves and trusting that we do have good players on this offense, and we have a good group of players that really play hard for each other moving forward.
What did you think of Charbonnet and Jackson Smith and Jigba and sort of what they did on Sunday?
Yeah, I think, one thing is obviously wish they had more ops, but that's going to come like anything with more opportunities as far as total number of plays within the game. But in terms of opening game for those guys, going out there, the moment's not too big for either of those guys. They're able to go out there and execute their assignments and what they were asked to do in the game, and looking forward to their roles growing as the season continues to go on. I'm sorry, with the wind.
How do you keep the noise?
Oh, for the noise. Oh, the perfect. Hey, it's like I keep that up right there for the noise, huh? No, this environment we know is going to be as loud as it gets. It's going to be, the roles are reversed. We go from having some of the loudest fans in the world, where we get to enjoy that as an offense when we're on the home side of it, but now we're going on the road, knowing that they're going to be loud, and that's where execution and the understanding of what our tempo and what our cadence is when we're on the road, when we have that toolbox to utilize when we go on a road environment, making sure we're all on the same page, and knowing that getting off on the snap count, all 11 firing off the ball at the same time is so imperative in these noisy environments. But we also look at it the same way. The positive side for us is then the defense has to deal with all of those same structural issues, where they're on the silent communication for everything they got to do. So feel like, throughout the course of different home games and road games, there's going to be noise, and, you want those type of environments. They amp everyone up, get everyone going, but we can't, again, let that make us do anything outside of the framework of what we want to do and execute.
You haven't had Evan Brown do that, silent count or on the road, big environment. Now he's got 2 new tackles. How curious are you how Evan Brown?
I think, the one thing for us, when it comes to the silent counts or the verbal cadence, we really start that in OTAs and we rotate that. We know that at least half the games, especially with the odd number of games now, we got the more on the road than at home this year. So we really spaced that out and planned for that and had every other, whether it's been every other week or every other practice, and really worked hard to get the music cranking out here and work on the silent count throughout the course of the last several months right there. So feel comfortable with it, and it's just part of the way that we operate. It's not something that comes about at the first or second week of the season as we are in right now.
How has Jason Peters looked the last couple of days?
Yeah, it's pretty special to see a guy walk in and look like he's ready to play right now, and knowing that he's going into his 20th season in the NFL, and came out here and was able to move around with great foot speed, great quickness, and just his football knowledge and his understanding. Like, in my mind, to see him come out here yesterday and before really getting into meetings and knowing all our calls, but just have a football understanding where he can just get in and fit in and see what pressure coming and pick it up and know what's going on has been special to see. So he'll be a great addition, not only for him as a player, but the person where some of these younger linemen can talk to and gain some great knowledge from him.
What right away shows up in the 19-year plan? What does he do that Cross doesn't do or Lucas couldn't do?
I would say, showing up in that type of position, for both Charles and Abe, they took time in an off-season program, had to get used to a system, had to know what's going on. But for Jason, for a guy with that many snaps accumulated at a high level throughout his career, he has that ability to just walk out onto a NFL practice field and maybe not need all the details of the knowledge, because he's got it somewhere in his archives that he can resource and reference, and able to come out here and function at a high level, with limited exposure to a totally new system.
How much you guys emphasize third down and some situation stuff in the offseason? Was it frustrating to see how things played out on Sunday?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt, our expectations and what our goals are on third down didn't play out how we saw them, or, how we felt like they would go there. And so I think that goes back to, one example, one game of it right there. Like, let's not let that bleed into the next game, or let us try to say, hey, we need to change the whole thing of how we're approaching it, or change how we want to execute a certain play. We just need to do better in those pressure situations that come up throughout the course of the game, and continue to have that positive mindset moving forward.
Correcting that stuff that happened on Sunday, what role did the coaches specifically play in that?
I think it's like any part of the game where you're able to get a good, honest evaluation as a coaching staff on that Monday, where you go through everything and that after action report where you go through it honestly, and then you go through it with the players, and for us as an offense, the ability, we got some great players, we got great people, on the offensive side of the ball that are totally open to that clear, open, and honest communication on a following a loss, when we know it's a little easier to correct after a win. If something goes wrong, you're feeling a little bit better, but everyone still wants to win. Everyone's competitive. So when you come in after a loss and those guys are able to listen and then also provide their own feedback and some stuff, because I think like everything else, it's a collaborative effort in the NFL, and everyone's always learning and always looking for a way to improve or to provide more clarity in those scenarios.
As much as you're emphasizing the third down play, how much of the coaching and teaching is going on about first down? We got to get that and make a third and manage.
Yeah, so talking about the third downs and then what precedes that, I think that's really one of our key points that we make and we talked about throughout the course of the offseason is the first and second down efficiency is always going to lead to better production on third down. So the more times that we can get into those third and six or less situations throughout the course of the game, just percentage-wise in football, the better chances that you're going to have. And I know on our scoring drive there, for example, I don't believe we had a third down. So there's always a good way to execute high on third down is not have any of those. That's always a nice way to do it too. But they're going to come up. They're going to be critical situations. But that first and second down execution, getting into third and manageables and providing better offensive opportunities than being in a third and long, especially against in a road environment against elite pass rushers or an elite pressure plan like we're about to see right here. Trying to stay third and manageable is a big part of it, which all starts on our first and second down execution.
Anything else? Thank you.